Hi, everybody. Welcome back to those of you who are returning. It's good to see your faces, everyone. And for the new folks that are here tonight, thank you for coming. We know there's a lot going on. It's warm outside. You might want to be outside instead, but we appreciate you coming tonight. My intent for this evening and subsequent talks, as I said last time, is to encourage discussion, to bring our community together, to talk about our emotions and our feelings, the things that we all have in common, to connect here once a month, to explore our commonality, and to challenge the way our thinking is, and to encourage one another. I'm a big believer in this, a huge believer in the power of connectivity. I don't mean electronic connectivity. I mean face-to-face, the good old school connection, socializing, so important for us. And there's a lot going on, as I said, and there's a lot going on in the realm of well-being and contentment, or lack thereof, if you're involved with the schools. If we're all touched by emotional health issues. A lot of people refer to them as mental health issues. I prefer emotional, because at its core, for many of us, that's what it's about. So, some call what's going on the island an epidemic. Suicide attempts are up with high schoolers. Depression is up. And I think it's important to talk about it and talk about the way we feel. And most importantly, I think it's important to talk about it with our kids. There is no stigma about this. We all have these feelings at one time or another, some of us more acutely than others. So we have nothing to hide. We're going to be talking about it, and we encourage you all to talk about it in public. So if you can right now, just settle in. Turn your cell phones off. Put them away, please, if you can. Take a deep breath. Relax yourself and be here, present in the moment. Turn to your neighbor. Say hello if you don't know them, both sides. And my wish for all of us tonight is community, for health, a little bit of intelligence, purpose, passion, and real support. I'm going to be talking about emotional intelligence. I don't know these kids. No, I'm kidding. What is emotional intelligence? Who knows? This isn't the question and answer portion. Is emotional intelligence knowing our own emotions, or is it the ability to know other people's emotions? Well, perhaps emotional intelligence is being so intelligent you don't need emotions. Wouldn't that be great sometimes? Sometimes it would be nice. However, most of us need this aspect in our lives. A lot of us think technically and analytically, and emotional intelligence isn't something that's taught. At least it's taught in the home, but as far as I know, except for a few states that I'm aware of that I'll talk about, emotional intelligence is not a foundational piece of our academic system. And a lot of folks don't know how to confront it, talk about it at home. We've learned that it's integral to our well-being, to understand our feelings and those of others. And the question is, how do we get taught? We should be taught at home, we should be taught in the schools, but some are never taught, some have never learned the language, so we're going to talk about that. Emotional intelligence has to be learned. We've worked a lot on it in our own home. You know, you think your kids just get it, but sometimes we have to talk about empathy and what that really means. So, first let's talk about a little history. In 1990, there were two psychologists on the East Coast, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, not John Mayer the singer, who coined the term emotional intelligence. They were the founding fathers, and they wrote a paper. And what it did is it talked about mental abilities that we all have that are malleable. Some need to be encouraged more than others, but it's a basic thing that we have. But they need to be brought out. Then in 1996, a guy by the name of Dan Goleman literally wrote the book on emotional intelligence called Emotional Intelligence. And when he did this, he actually started assigning sort of personality traits to it. Psychologists didn't really care for this. There were things like self-control, motivation, which don't, in the broadest sense, really factor in. And then it reached over to business. The Harvard Business Review hailed it as one of the most influential business ideas of the decade. It was groundbreaking, paradigm shattering. So it was a cause célèbre. So what Fortune 500 companies did is they rushed to get all their top executives learning about this. They quickly figured out ways to measure it, and they were using it in their employee development programs. And what they came out with ultimately was that 90% of top executives have a high EIQ. They have the ability to read the intelligence, the emotional intelligence of others because they have it and they get it. 80% of the lowest employees, lowest level of employees, did not have emotional intelligence. So we got to work on that. If we apply emotional intelligence to ourselves, what it means is to understand ourselves. It's to manage our emotions and use them appropriately at the correct times. For example, anger. Anger has its place. We all express it at certain times, but do we express it correctly? Some guy, I think his name's pronounced Aristotle, I don't know. He wrote something 2,000 years ago about anger. Anger is easy, he said. It's easy to get angry. The key to anger is, can you do it at the right time, at the right level, for the right purpose, and to the right person? How often do we get angry at the wrong person, when actually, when we're angry, it's usually ourselves being frustrated? So if we apply emotional intelligence to others, it's the ability to use our empathy to put ourselves in other people's shoes. This is very important, and this is what we teach our kids. To gauge and understand, to understand the social cues and expressions and body language without ego, without judgment. This is tough to do. Listen to someone talking about the way they feel, not be judging them inside. Wow, this guy's... No. We separate ourselves from that, if we're able. And who does this? Not enough of us. There's so much going on. We're always busy pushing our story, our own agenda. It's a bit of a lost art. I believe it's on the rebound. I've had great conversations with a lot of you. But have you ever been in a conversation with someone and it's just all about them? You can talk with somebody for 20 minutes and they just keep telling their story. And at the end of it, you kind of think, gosh, was that? You don't quite feel like you got anything out of it. So people that are comfortable with their emotions and understand themselves learn to be empathetic. And it's just good conversation. The ability to do this enables good conversation. It doesn't have to pull you down. You don't have to wallow in pity and too much empathy. It doesn't have to make you weaker. That's not the point. So what it really does is it's perspective taking. It allows us to appreciate diversity, to be open-minded. That Aristotle guy again, he said something a long time ago. The educated mind has the ability to take varying opinions and listen to them and not necessarily accept them. Who does that anymore? We should go to Washington, D.C. with that. And for our kids, you know what it's about? It's about self-knowledge, knowing yourself, where you belong, and defining yourself. In 1978, by now famous psychologist by the name of Murray Bowen wrote about differentiation. And what happens in our adolescence is we learn to differentiate who we are as a person. We learn self-definition. We learn to connect with ourselves. And we learn, if we are able to, that we don't have to rely on other people's acceptance to define who we are. We don't have to defend our beliefs, and we don't attack the beliefs of others. This is differentiation. And we use our mind for appropriate responses. We don't have to react to other people's emotions. That's a tough one. So differentiation falls really nicely into self-esteem. The middle years, adolescence, is critical for kids' self-esteem. This is where they learn to figure who they are out. They get a stronger idea of who they are. And how do we build this? We build this by understanding our emotions. And the good news about this, contrary to what you might have heard, is emotions are gender neutral. Boys, as well as girls, share a high capacity for understanding and using emotions. They've done tests, and we're on the same level as you are, ladies. So it just hasn't been brought out of us sometimes. So how does it help? Well, in 96, Dan Goleman, Emotional Intelligence book, he wrote that to alleviate the worldwide tendencies toward depression. This was 20 years ago. That educating kids and students and parents through the development of children in the schools with essential human competencies such as self-esteem, intelligence of the way we feel, to be able to define our feelings, is critical. A woman named Carol Gilligan wrote a book in 93 in a different voice about emotional intelligence. Responsiveness in relationships is critical. We know this in our marriages, with our kids, at work. It is critical to our mental health. To respond to someone when they make an emotional bid towards you. This is a John Gottman term we'll talk about a little bit. But a lot of us have been married for a long time. We get used to talking, and we may not get a response from our partner. Or our child may be talking to us, and we're a little busy. But these are emotional bids. They are ways that we try to connect with one another. So responding back is key, because after a while, it starts to degenerate ourselves and our feeling about, am I alone in this? This is the way we establish connectivity. So, the ability to talk through our feelings and resolving conflicts are imperative. If our feelings are quashed, then damaging perception stays with us through adulthood. We have traumas. Really? Where have we heard this? Has anyone heard this before? That things that happen when you're a kid may come up later? Strikes me as every psychology movie, every comic strip, you see the counselor sitting there with the glasses smoking his pipe, and the child says, "But my dad was really mean to me." Really? How does that make you feel? Well, that's real. Some of us still deal with those things. But we can find a way to put them aside if we learn these tools. They can be painful, but they can be overcome. And that damaging perception, can affect your entire adulthood. Now, how is this stuff taught? As I alluded to earlier, in Illinois, they have an amazing program. In fact, when I spoke last month, there was a woman sitting here that said, I touched on emotional intelligence a little bit, and she said, "Oh, we do that in Illinois. We have a whole program." So I went and looked it up. It's called CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. And what it is, it's a collaborative association of social and emotional learning. And it is ingrained in their school system from elementary school all the way up to high school. And they have benchmarks. In early elementary school, you are expected to be able to label and define your emotions as a child, which is critical, and we'll talk more about that. By late elementary school, you're supposed to be able to identify nonverbal cues from people around you, from the kids around you who are trying to connect with you and the way they're feeling. By middle school, and some guys out there and girls may know what I'm talking about, you learn to identify stressors, things that stress you out. This is when this starts happening, and you learn workarounds. You learn ways to deal with them in middle school in Illinois. And then in high school, you take all of this with empathy, and you learn to talk to other people, to collaborate, to accept other people's feelings without aggression, and reach out to other people. So whose responsibility is all this? This is happening in some states, but it really has to start at home. And how do we do this? Well, for a lot of us as parents, our approach, while loving, we love our kids, certainly, we may not know the way to address these things. And we may not be aware of how to build and teach these things. So, enter John Gottman. Some of you may have already heard of this. He's a very famous psychologist. He runs the Gottman Institute. He was at the UW. He's written a book on emotional intelligence for kids, and he has described the 4 emotion parenting types of parents, different levels of emotions in parents. First is the emotional coach parent. This parent has got it going on. This parent knows how to talk with his kids about the way they feel. And it's not giving in, and we'll get into that. There's the parents that disapprove or dismiss their kids' emotions. We've all done it. You try to suppress the emotion, get over it, let's be happy. You try to minimize it. Not important, perhaps, you think about, that's the disapproving parent, that their emotions just aren't important. And then there's the wonderful laissez-faire parent. And I think we've all done this a little bit, and we've all been with this group. The parents that anything goes, kids are going nuts, there's no differentiation of anything, there's no way to control it, they don't teach anything to their kids about how they're feeling, and they learn later that they don't really know how to regulate their feelings. So the emotionally dismissive parent, feelings are unimportant. After all, they're just a child. They can't really mean much. They try to make sure that negatives disappear quickly. They minimize things. And what happens is the child thinks, well, if I have these feelings, they must be wrong because my parents don't feel this way. Then there's the disapproving parent, who's actually worse. They judge and they criticize their kids for emotions. They tell them to control their emotions, that emotions are weak. Kids need toughness, and I'm the parent, and what I say goes. Well, kids do need toughness. This is true, and we need to work toward that as well. But a little bit of coaching goes a long way. And the laissez-faire parent gives little guidance, as I said, doesn't set limits, and their kids don't learn to regulate, and generally speaking later, their kids have problems with relationships and in groups. So the coaching parent is a superstar, but we can all be there. The coaching parent learns to work with the child. He looks at an emotional event as the opportunity to be intimate and connect. Now, do we all have time for this? Not always. However, if we do take time to identify the way they're feeling, help them label what the emotion is. We have a 6-year-old, Dennis and I. She gets angry and upset a lot. All of our kids do. But if you take a second to understand and say to them, what is it that you're feeling? They can't generally express it to you. Does it feel like this? I felt that way too. Yes. You validate their feelings and you help them label it. Frustration, that's what that is. And you do all this without judgment and without frustration. You're a super parent. Sounds easy. One thing to know when you're trying to learn this emotion coaching is that negative emotions in our kids are natural. They go through a period where everything's negative. I think we've all been there. Your kids are always bad, bad, bad. But negative emotions in kids are age appropriate and they slowly diminish. But when we take time to listen, what happens is we gain credibility with our kids. If you're always pushing their emotions aside, you're always getting angry with them, if you take time to understand the way they're feeling, help them label it, help them work with it, you get it, you have felt that way too, then you start gaining credibility. Your child knows that you are looking out for them, that you can connect with them, that you feel it too. It's normal the way they feel. So it's a foundation of confidence for kids. Now, I want to be clear, emotion coaching is not enabling. Old school parents think, oh, all this woo-woo and their feelings and so on and so forth. I didn't get this growing up. They don't have to like it. I don't have time to huddle with my child. Well, we all work towards this goal. We do it as much as possible, as much as we can. And it's also not an end to discipline. People think if I get involved in this and wallow in these emotions, I'm going to lose my whole ability to be the tough guy to discipline my child. In fact, it works the other way. You actually gain credibility. And when it is time to get upset, there are appropriate times to use anger, as Aristotle said. When it gets time to do this, then your child knows, wow, dad or mom who understands me must be really upset and they really care about me. So you gain a credibility by connecting this way with your child. And John Gottman has, through his studies, found out that children are more aware, they're more fulfilled, and they more live from the inside out. And parents, they get better scores in school. Better academics, they feel better about themselves. But today's a little different, isn't it? We have a little outsider in the family who I think I may talk about next month. And he's on your children's hip at all times. It's a cell phone. It's a little tougher now, isn't it? With the screens and the cell phones. So kids, what they're finding out, they don't easily know themselves as well as they used to, as well as we did growing up, not that we're all perfect. They don't have the ability to get out, or they don't have the drive because they're being pulled in to isolate. They don't learn the rough and tumble out in the neighborhood like we did. We were always getting out. You know, you've heard the stories, kids. We used to just run through the trees. You guys, you got to get out there. So it's important that we understand that, particularly during adolescence, isolation is a normal event. Kids are trying to figure out who they are. And isolating now, unfortunately, is way easier. And it is almost addicting because you have this thing to keep you busy. You're pulled into it. So it's important that we balance these things. We challenge it at certain times. Sure, you want to respect your kids' space and privacy in their teens, but we don't just give them carte blanche. You go in and you connect with them. You bring them out. You have them come and be with the family to work on their emotional intelligence. I have a friend. She's a psychologist in Colorado. I had a conversation with her once. It kind of blew me away. She said, we have a son, he's 17 years old, and he's gotten to the last year of high school, but he's never really talked to us. We haven't really been able to connect with him. But we let him kind of do his thing, we always have. And he got to be when he was about ready to graduate, he came to us and he said, I'm not really sure how to really, when I get out of the house or get with people, go up, look for a job, I'm not sure how to connect with people. So they put his cell phone aside for a while. They were just letting him do what he wanted because they didn't want to disturb him. They wanted him to have his privacy. They thought it would be too much to actually enforce parenting a little stronger than some parents do. And this amazed me, because you do have to work starting at a young age. We've learned now that there's a book by a guy named Dan Siegel that adolescence has been extended now. Officially, it used to be from 11 to 17, 18, or 12 to 18. Now it's all the way up to the mid-20s. Why is this? Because we allow it to be. That's what I think. That's what a lot of people think if you read about it. It's cultural enabling. It's parental enabling. Kids do not learn the core strengths to get out and do things on their own because their parents do everything for them. There's truth to this. There's a happy medium in these things. So when you allow your child to decide what they're doing at all times and you don't regulate and you let them go to all these distractions, I meet with parents and say, my child has graduated and they don't even know how to get a car to the house. They're at the airport and they don't even know what gate to go to. They're in their 19 and 20. They call me because they don't know how to get from point A to point B. Well, you've done everything for them. So, paradoxically, in some ways, it has been learned that a secure attachment at infancy, and if this goes through, you're securely attached with your child, and you do this in nurturing ways like we've talked about, connecting, actually makes your child more autonomous as they get older, more socially competent. And the secure attachment, it's not dependence. This is not dependence. It's interdependence, which is critical. Our ability to be together with groups, with our parents, with our friends, with society, to know that we are all connected and we need one another, but we don't need that for our very survival. It's an interdependence. So, some very basic things. As we grow older, your IQ may not change, but you can work on your emotional intelligence. You can do this by putting yourself in other people's shoes. You can learn to manage, not bury your emotions. Learn the time and the place to express them. We teach our kids this. Manage stress effectively. There's times when it needs to be managed and we need to take a break. To build empathy, put yourself in other people's shoes to really think about how they're feeling. And social skills. It affects all our relationships. At work, employers are knowing now that people without emotional intelligence, they just pass over. The pros are better collaboration and teamwork. In our marriages, men, if we learn this at an early age, men want to fix things. If we listen, put ourselves in our shoes of our partner, and really listen to them, our marriage will be that much better. And with our kids, Dr. Monica McGoldrick, wrote a book called The Expanded Family Life Cycle, where we connect with ourselves. Children who connect with themselves, we teach kids to listen with an open heart. I urge you to all try this. Listening with an open heart, accepting. And to relate with openness. This connection involves accepting beliefs of others without attacking, and allowing yourself to express a range of emotions and let others do it as well. So what can parents do? What we're doing is we're building a better functioning kid. They can deal with issues, they become confident, they feel good about themselves and their self-worth. And they grow up to be a child who can function better, can take on challenges and distress and know how to deal with it. They're confident knowing what it takes to process these things, and it becomes a default way of operating. So that is emotional intelligence. And I'm going to finish with a story. Our children These are just two of our three. It's just 10 years ago. Seems like a lifetime ago. They are completely different personalities. I'm sure you guys can say this about your own kids. On the left is our ballerina. On the right is our stoic surfer. Well, they've kind of gone at it for a long time. Sol, our son, gets very frustrated because the ballerina is super emotional and everything's a catastrophe. And Sol is like, oh, please. And Isabel is like, come on, express yourself, Sol. So what's happened is, as we've worked with our children on these things, we've seen an amazing transformation. Sol has grown, and now, when Isabel dares to be too emotional, Sol says, Isabel, have you thought about it this way? Try this. And that's when we knew that we were succeeding with our children, with their emotional intelligence. Thanks.